That's right. Bear down, Bears fans. It's time for another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast, Bears Banter, powered by Second City Gridiron. Bill Zimmerman with you. And I am looking forward to seeing those YouTube comments about how much you hate that open that I will continue to do because I like it and it's my podcast. Very excited to be back on after a week in New Orleans for my other job here. But, we know we love to talk Bears here, and we're going to talk Bears here with Tom Waddle, of course, of ESPN, former Chicago Bear, great Chicago Bear. Like what he did on the football field was truly remarkable there in the early 90s. He was a great Bear, albeit short-lived, but just a phenomenal career for him. Obviously a phenomenal media career in Chicago as well. Looking forward to talking to him. We'll talk a little Super Bowl and we'll get into some other things, obviously, with the Bears with him. I know he was at the Virginia McCaskey service. We'll ask him a little bit about Virginia as well. So let's move forward here. Let's talk some things here. We got the Super Bowl. We got not new ownership, but transition of ownership. And let's just dive in here. And let's start with ownership, and then I'll get into the Super Bowl and see what else is on my mind here before we get Tom on the show here. Starting with ownership, and I think there's some things that look, I'm not saying I have scoops or inside information or any of that. I'm just saying that I am confident when I say the NFL wants George Halas's family to own the Chicago Bears. And I'm not saying they're just going to give them money and do whatever they want, but they do not want George Halas's family out of the NFL. And I think there are several people within the McCaskey family that also want to remain a part of the NFL, because I think there are plenty of McCaskey, Virginia had several kids, and there are plenty of those kids that aren't that interested in the business of the NFL, but there are some that are. And I think the idea that, the estate tax is going to cripple the Bears, they're going to be forced to sell to pay taxes. Could you imagine the headlines? And these headlines are not on ESPN. Okay, these headlines are on CNN, they're on Forbes, they're on Fox Business News, they're national news. The Chicago Bears, the charter franchise of the league, George Halas's family is forced to sell the charter franchise so they can pay a tax bill because Virginia McCaskey passed away. Just think about that headline and think about how much the NFL cares about their image and how much they do to try and control narratives. And they would be okay with that happening. Do you really think that's the situation? Look, I am not super wealthy. I don't know how all this stuff works. All I know is I see billionaires that pay a smaller percentage of taxes than I do on a regular basis. So I know that there are plenty of ways to stash money and do things that will allow transfer of ownership, transfer of assets without major crippling taxes. Okay. I know Clark Hunt, when he passed away, the Chiefs owner, Lamar Hunt, when he passed away and gave it to Clark Hunt, his son, the Kansas City Chiefs, that I know he used, you can find it online, a series of trusts that lessened the tax burden, so they were able to do that transition easily. There is a transition, there is a plan in place on file with the NFL on how this would happen at Virginia's passing. So there's no way the NFL would have a plan on file that they knew that would cripple the Bears and force them to sell the team. This will happen again. There may be some tweaks here. We may see them use the capital investment and get an influx in cash. Maybe they use that cash towards the stadium. Maybe they use that cash to buy out some of the other siblings that aren't interested in remaining and would just rather have some cash and to go away. And George McCaskey becomes a more prominent owner of the Chicago Bears. Again, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I am pretty confident in saying that the McCaskeys are not going to sell. They are going to remain in place here with the Chicago Bears. And again, it may look a little different. We'll see, how exactly this plays out, but the Halas family will still be a part of the Chicago Bears. I am confident about that. And some of the articles I see written about, they'll immediately sell the team. Here comes Jeff Bezos, all that. I just am not buying any of it. So, that obviously that news broke. Virginia's passing the week of the Super Bowl, was down in New Orleans. That was a great time. Busy, but always a great time when I'm able to travel there and go to the Super Bowl. But let's talk about the game here, because I think there are some Bears ties here, with Matt Nagy on one side and Vic Fangio on the other. And look, I was a guy, I thought the Chiefs were going to win. And I think you kind of get stuck in it's Brady and Belichick, they're going to win. It's Reed and Mahomes, they're going to win, because most of the time they do. And you ignore kind of what is happening, and that the Eagles were a far superior team. Now, again, I still believe that if the Chiefs were down one score in the fourth quarter, that Patrick Mahomes would have been inevitable. I always believe that. If it's a one-score game, the Kansas City Chiefs are going to win that football game because they have Patrick Mahomes. I mean, look at that game against the Bills a few years ago. He had 9 seconds or whatever it was to get the team down to get the game to overtime, and he did. Like, Patrick Mahomes just figures out a way to do it. But if you beat the snot out of them and blow them the heck out of the water, yeah, you're going to be able to win the football game, because you take Mahomes out. You take that X factor out of the game. That's exactly what the Eagles did. I don't blame Matt Nagy. I don't blame Andy Reid. I think that was just a remarkable game plan from Vic Fangio. I think the Eagles just executed everything tremendously. I do think it's funny that when the Chiefs offense is unstoppable, Andy Reid is a genius. And when the Chiefs offense doesn't work, Matt Nagy is a moron. I do think that's funny how that works. Nagy's always to blame and Reid is always to praise. But, whatever happens there, we'll see. I think the Chiefs, the Chiefs situation moving forward is interesting. It's going to be really difficult for them to pay Trey Smith. I think there's a good chance that he has to go. But at the same time, that Chiefs offensive line proved against the Eagles that that's not a great line, and it's not a great situation if you have to lose Trey Smith. So, they don't have a ton of money. They can rework a lot of contracts because they have guys making big bucks. But, Travis Kelce, is he coming back? And if he does come back, is he the same guy he was? He definitely, while he was still effective this year, he was not the same player he's been. He's getting older. Chris Jones is still great, but he's getting older. There's a lot of questions here. But, Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy, those new weapons, can the Chiefs offense get a little more life into it? The running game. The Chiefs have a lot of question marks. To me, and if I get a chance, maybe I'll ask Tom Waddle about this. It's kind of similar to like when Waddle got into the Bears there in 89 and 90. Again, the Bears obviously were not as good as the Chiefs. I'm not going to pretend they're as good as the Chiefs. They won one Super Bowl. The Chiefs have been to several more and won several more. But, the Bears were a great, great team that was like steadily getting worse, right? They won it all in 85. They lose Buddy Ryan in 86. They lose Wilbur Marshall the year after that. Jim McMahon can't stay healthy. They get stuck with Mike Tomczak. They try Jim Harbaugh. They don't get the quarterback situation quite settled out. But at the same time, guys like Steve McMichael and Mike Singletary and those guys were still there into the 89, 90, 91 seasons. So when Tom Waddle was getting there, where you had the traces, that the tail end of what those great Bears teams were, and the Bears were still good when Waddle first got there, but they were not the same team. And you have to wonder, are the Chiefs, again, we'll see what they do here, but are the Chiefs potentially kind of entering that situation here where, yes, they still have Mahomes and they still have Reed. I don't know how much longer Andy Reid's going to want to do this, but they still have those two guys. So they're still going to be in contention, but are they going to be able to rebuild the roster around them, get enough new great players and become, the great team that they have been? Because it does look like they need to kind of reshuffle the deck a little bit. And from the Eagles side of things, let's talk about this a little bit. The one thing I really get frustrated about everyone saying is, the Bears should follow the Eagles blueprint. I really hate that argument. That argument to me is kind of silly. And again, you want to say the blueprint is building the trenches up? Sure, but every team should build the trenches up. Anyone that doesn't think the Bears should build up the trenches doesn't know how to build a football team. That's not the Eagles' blueprint. That's just NFL 101. Now, Howie Roseman has done it to a tremendous success. And I think that's kind of what you're saying is the Eagles' blueprint is get a team absolutely loaded with talent, and you can win a Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts. And I'm not knocking Jalen Hurts, but Jalen Hurts to me isn't in that elite top 5 category. He's not Mahomes. He's not Josh Allen, Lamar, Joe Burrow, Herbert. I mean, Jaden Daniels might be in that group now. Like maybe CJ Stroud. We'll see how much Bobby Slowick was an issue this past year. If CJ Stroud can bounce back a little bit. To me, Hurts is towards the top of that next tier of quarterbacks. And that's, the Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, the way he's played the last couple of years. To me, that's where Hurts is. And that's not a knock on him. I think he's a very good quarterback, but I don't think he's an elite quarterback. Now, he won a championship. He won a Super Bowl MVP. I would have liked to have seen the defense get an MVP there because I think that was the defensive line was the true MVP. Kind of like that Eli Manning, the first Super Bowl when they beat the undefeated Patriots. Eli Manning gets the MVP. I really think Justin Tuck should have gotten that MVP because the Giants' defensive line was the MVP. They should have had someone. Tuck had the best game out of the 4. Tuck should have been the guy. Eagles' defensive line was the MVP. Josh Sweat probably should have gotten the MVP there, but Hurts had a great game, and I'm not going to take anything away from him. He played very well. And I think for the Bears to sit there and Bears fans to sit there and be like, oh, well, they should just follow the Eagles blueprint. The Eagles blueprint is that Howie Roseman might be the best GM, not in football, in sports right now. He is on an incredible heater. He is, over the last 5 years, he has hit on every first and second round pick but one. Every other one is a hit. 90%. And yeah, it was a bad miss. He took Jalen Reagor instead of Justin Jefferson. That was bad. But he has hit on 90% of those draft picks. And there's plenty of guys in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round that are contributors as well. He's not built up an offensive and defensive line that's not only great, it's tremendous depth. His secondary has got 2 rookies and they're shut down corners. Cooper DeJean's running pick sixes back in the Super Bowl. It's incredible what he's done. Saquon Barkley, obviously one of the great free agent signings of all time now. It's a top 5 free agent signing of all time. Howie Roseman is on an all-time heater. So Howie Roseman is the blueprint in Philadelphia. So to sit there and be like, and that was kind of the thing with Justin Fields was, build around Fields, trade back, get the haul, Eagles blueprint. You have to hit on an obscene amount of picks, and you have to understand value in the draft. How Howie creates value in terms of what he does with trading and being able to squeeze out extra, he'll eventually, over 3 years, turn like a 3rd round pick into a 1st round pick. It's remarkable what he does with how he maneuvers and finds extra value all over the board in terms of, trading a 4th round pick for a future 3rd round pick. And then the following year, trading that 3rd round pick into a future 2nd round pick. And then the following year, trading like a 2nd round pick into a future 1st. And he just keeps maneuvering and getting more and more draft picks. He just turns great picks into multiple picks. He is phenomenal at what he does. So to just say, just follow the Eagles blueprint, to me is just silly and not really giving Howie the credit he deserves. And I also want to give credit to Vic Fangio. And I know Chicago Bears fans, we all love Vic Fangio. And I look at his body of work now as a defensive coordinator. He is one of the best defensive coordinators, if not the best defensive coordinator of all time. And that may be a hot take for some of you, but I really don't think it is. And let me explain what I'm saying when I say he is the best defensive coordinator of all time. Bill Belichick was a defensive coordinator. Tom Landry was a defensive coordinator. Chuck Noll, some of these guys, all-time great defensive minds, but they move into head coaching positions. So Bill Belichick was a defensive coordinator, I think, for 5 years, and the Giants in the late 80s and the 1990 Giants, those were Belichick defenses. They were all-time great defenses. So Belichick is an all-time great defensive coach, but then he becomes a head coach. He never really becomes a defensive coordinator again. And he's a Bill Belichick has a greater defensive mind than Vic Fangio, but he's not a better defensive coordinator. Now, again, part of the issue there is that Vic never really got an opportunity as a head coach. When he finally did in Denver, it didn't really work out. So that's part of the reason where some of these great defensive coordinators don't have the body of work at that coaching position because they became head coaches like Landry, right? And Tom Landry, the Cowboys' doomsday defense throughout the 70s was a great defense, but Landry was the head coach. So that's a little bit of a difference there. So when you're looking at defensive coordinators, even Buddy Ryan was the Bears defensive coordinator for maybe about 7 or 8 years. And then, Buddy Ryan, to me, kind of faded a little bit. He had a really good defense with the Eagles. Then he bounced around with I think it was not the Titans. I think it was the Oilers at the time, and then the Cardinals. And that tail end, he wasn't the same player because the same coach. Offenses have kind of evolved a little bit. Buddy, to me, didn't evolve as much as he should have. And his 8-46 defense didn't quite work as well in the early 90s when teams attack things a little differently. But Buddy Ryan at his peak, better defensive coordinator than Vic Fangio. Buddy Ryan at his peak, maybe the best defensive coordinator of all time. But Buddy Ryan, again, doesn't have that full body of work. So when we're looking at guys like Dick LeBeau, longtime defensive coordinator, even Monty Kiffin, there are some great defensive coordinators, and I'm not trying to take anything away from him. But Vic Fangio, and I don't have his resume in front of me, so I'm not going to have every stop, but he was the Carolina Panthers defensive coordinator when they were an expansion team, and they immediately became a great defense. I remember watching that. I didn't see the game live. The Carolina Panthers were playing somebody, and they were up 2-3 scores. End of the game. They're pitching a shutout. All right, this is Vic Fangio's defense. Sam Mills, who was a great Saints linebacker, was the Panthers middle linebacker at the time. And here's what happens. The opponent has first and goal at the 2 with 2 minutes to go in the game. The game is over. It is a meaningless score. They try and run the ball on first down. They get stuffed. They try and run the ball on second down. They get stuffed. Now the clock's running out. Sam Mills, in the cocky, but in the most confident way, calls a timeout. I remember this vividly. We're going to give you another chance to score and blow our shutout. And the Panthers stuffed them again. This is the second year the Panthers ever existed in the league. And they have an elite defense. That's Vic Fangio's first shot, I believe, as a defensive coordinator. Then, he bounces around a little bit. I think he worked with the Ravens, maybe the Texans. Surfaces again, San Francisco 49ers defensive coordinator under Jim Harbaugh. Those defenses were elite, incredible defenses. We talk about Jim Harbaugh being a great head coach and a great offensive mind, and I'm not saying he's not, but the engine of those 49ers teams was the Vic Fangio defense. He was that good. Here comes Vic to the Bears, 2018. How much did we love that? Vic Fangio does it again. Then he becomes the Broncos head coach. Doesn't work too well. The Dolphins pick him up. The Dolphins cry him out of town because he coached them too hard. That's a little rough to take. And now he comes to the Eagles and takes what was a crappy defense. That's why the Eagles weren't good previously and struggled, and turns them into an elite unit basically overnight. Vic Fangio, his full body of work as a defensive coordinator may be unmatched because he continues to evolve, continues to do it with different personnel. I've never seen anyone continue to be able to adapt and scheme the way he does on the defensive side of the ball. Truly remarkable there for Vic. So I absolutely love what Vic Fangio is doing, and I hope he continues to stick around. I know he's getting in his late 60s. How much longer is Vic going to want to do this as well? But it is truly awesome what he's done as the defensive coordinator of the Eagles and his entire career. So while I've babbled here now for almost 20 minutes and we haven't really talked too much about the Bears offseason, we'll have more podcasts here moving forward talking about Bears free agency, what they should do. Obviously, the draft, we'll cover the draft like we always do. So we'll have some things that we'll have more podcasts moving forward, but I'll do a little primer on it now in terms of kind of the best approach here that I see for the Bears. And right now, to me, I don't want the Bears leaving gaping holes to try and fill in the draft. I want them to be able to use the draft to build up positions where they already have guys. Like at number 10, if the Bears decide to take an edge, okay, but they better have edge already determined ahead of time. I don't want to sit there and say, it's clear the Bears have to draft X because they don't have a starter caliber player there, and it's obvious what they're doing. I don't like that plan. I never liked that plan. I do love taking interior offensive linemen in the early second round. If the Bears don't take an interior offensive lineman with those 2 second-round picks, I will be very upset if that happens. I think they have to do that. Even if they take an offensive lineman at 10, they have to come back and take when those linemen hit all the time. It is a great spot to pick someone, a guard or a center right there. So, but in terms of the free agency situation, I think the Bears are in an interesting situation. They've got plenty of money. They can create a little more cap space. This may be unpopular. I think they should cut TJ Edwards. He does save some cap space there. I think they should pivot to Jack Sanborn. I'd like for them to cut Tremaine Edmonds and keep TJ Edwards, but Tremaine Edmonds, I think financially needs to be here another season. So I think they're kind of stuck with him for one more year. I think the fact that they did this with this linebacker investment when Jack Sanborn was already on the roster, and I'm not trying to pretend Jack Sanborn is Ray Lewis, but Jack Sanborn can clearly play the position and play it well. And they saw that during his rookie season, the back half of his rookie season, and they still went out and spent on 2 linebackers. That has always bothered me. And I'm hoping that Ben Johnson being here, they're going to start correcting some of these mistakes that were made early on. Was it Ryan Poles alone? Was it Matt Eberflus's influence? I don't know. It doesn't matter. The players are here now. They need to fix it. So I would like to see Jack Sanborn in for TJ Edwards. You save a few $1 million there, and then that Edmonds goes the year after that, and you save several million, $17-18 million, which they absolutely should do. So I think they should create Gerald Everett needs to go. That didn't work out. You know me, if you were listening to this podcast, I thought Gerald Everett was a good signing. It was not. That did not work out. They still haven't figured out a second tight end. They really need to do that soon, but we'll see what they do in terms of creating a little more cap space. But when we look at this team, we know what the Bears need. The Bears need a lot of offensive line help. They're going to have to sign at least 2 offensive linemen during free agency. I don't see any way that, and when I say 2, I don't mean Coleman Shelton 1 year, $3 million type of signing. They need 2 investments in the interior of the offensive line. Braxton Jones, I think, is fine for this year, but I really don't think you can commit to Braxton Jones long-term. I just don't see, in terms of paying a left tackle, you're going to have to pay, if you want to keep Braxton Jones as your starting left tackle, you got to pay him $15 to $20 million a year. That's just the going rate. And Braxton Jones at $2 million a year or whatever he's making, great, fine. We're getting value there. Braxton Jones making nearly $20 million a year, that's a disaster. That is a terrible investment of funds. So they got to figure out left tackle, I think, next year. They've got too many holes on the interior to worry about it this year. Again, when I look at this Chicago Bears team, I expect them to be better in 2025, but and I do think the Bears expect to win games in 2025, but I think the Bears are looking at 2026 as the year where they can contend for the Super Bowl. So I don't think they're expecting to fix this roster overnight. I think they're going to look at this as starting to fix this roster this year, fix some of the mistakes Ryan Poles has made, because I think Ben Johnson's going to have a huge influence on the offensive line and the personnel decisions. Because I think the one thing that was interesting when I interviewed Rick Smith, and thank you all for those who listened to that Rick Smith interview. It was a great interview and it got a lot of publicity, and it would not have gotten as much publicity if it wasn't for you fans sharing it across social media platforms, saying, great, listen, check this out. So for those of you who shared that and helped spread that interview around, thank you, because that was a tremendous job from all of you. Really, tremendous what social media can do when you get a compelling piece of content there. But the one thing Rick Smith said about GM alignment, when I asked him about GM alignment and what does GM alignment mean, and he basically said that the GM and the coach are on the same page in terms of a vision. That a GM who loves his guys, and this is what Rick Smith said, everyone loves the guys they draft, the guys they bring in, that a GM is willing to sit down with Ben Johnson and say, that was a mistake. We should move on from this guy. We should change here, change there. So to me, when and I didn't push Rick on it because he had already given me so much. To me, like, I'm not saying Ben Johnson is running football operations, but Ben Johnson is really, I don't think Ben Johnson really reports to Ryan Poles. I think Ben Johnson probably reports to Kevin Warren, if we're being honest about this. I think this is more of a collaboration and not a traditional corporate ladder in terms of Ben Johnson to Ryan Poles to Kevin Warren. I don't see it this way. I think things are going to be different. I think Ben Johnson is going to have a major influence in terms of what the Chicago Bears do. Is he going to be highly involved in the safety that Ryan Poles brings in as a UDFA or as the 7th round draft pick? Maybe not. I'm not saying that. But is he going to be involved in every tight end they draft or bring in, every wide receiver, offensive line, key, larger free agents on the defensive side of the ball? I think Ben Johnson will have a major say in the room there. And I think obviously Dennis Allen on defensive personnel, because of his experience, will as well. So I think Ben Johnson's going to be heavily involved here. I don't think this is Ryan Poles' his decisions in terms of what they're doing with personnel, which to me is a good thing, because I've said it, I still don't. I don't completely trust Ryan Poles here in terms of what he's going to do with this team moving forward. So we're going to see how the Bears approach this in free agency. I don't have any big scoops. Trey Smith is definitely on the radar. Does it mean he's going to end up here? No, maybe the Chiefs say our offensive line was so bad in the Super Bowl, we have to figure out how they do this, and they pay a 4th offensive lineman. I don't know how they're going to do that, but we'll see what happens here. Obviously, we're still about a month away from free agency. So we got some time to kind of learn what the Chicago Bears plan to do and who they plan to go after. But they do have a good chunk of change. It gets eaten up quicker than you think. It's not like the Bears are going to go out and sign 6 major free agents. Plus, this free agent class isn't that great. But there are some good interior guys that will see who do they spend money on. Trey Smith is not the only guy. I get why fans want Trey Smith, but he's going to be $23-24 million a year. I truly believe that. He is going to be the highest paid guard in the NFL. Drew Dahlman, if you want him, I think he's going to be the 2nd highest paid center in the NFL, assuming he leaves the Falcons here. He's not going to get Creed Humphrey money, but I do think he's going to be pushing $15 million a year. So you got to decide how you want to spend money there. Because the Chicago Bears, it's not like they need 2 guys. They need several guys here. I think Kyler Gordon should probably get extended this offseason. They're probably not going to, if they do that, they won't do that till August. That's usually where those type of extensions come in. But I think they should extend Kyler Gordon. I think they have to kind of look at safety here, because Byard isn't pricey, but he's not cheap. Brisker hasn't really been able to stay on the field, unfortunately. Tyreek Stevenson, do you trust him as a boundary corner? Again, I've talked about the linebackers, and the defensive line is pretty good, but there is no depth there. They don't have, Montez Sweat really took a step back this year in terms of being a dominant edge that they need. He's an excellent 2nd-tier edge, but they're paying him to be a dominant, top-tier edge. We'll see what they do there. So that defense needs to be tweaked. They need a 3rd wide receiver. They need a 2nd tight end. I don't know if Ben Johnson's going to want DeAndre Swift as his primary running back. There are plenty of changes that this roster needs to have. They did not go 5-12 by accident. They went 5-12 because the roster did not come together as it was expected to. Yes, there's plenty of talented pieces, but there's a lot more holes than we expected, because we expected Tyreek Stevenson to get better. He regressed. We expected Jaquan Brisker to be on the field. He unfortunately couldn't be. We expected a lot of things to happen. Zach Pickens, could he at least to become a decent rotational guy? No, he's not. Like, we expected things to happen here, and they didn't. So when the team doesn't improve like you're hoping, yeah, you can blame coaches, you can blame whoever, but it also means a lot of these players had limited ceilings. I was as big as Roschon Johnson fan as any. Roschon Johnson's an RB3. He can't be an RB2. He's an RB3. He's a good RB3, but he can't be your 2nd running back. DeAndre Swift should be your 2nd running back. They need a new primary running back. Swift, I don't know if they can get rid of him this season. They probably have to have him one more year before he goes on his merry way as well. So plenty of decisions to be made here in the offseason. We'll be getting into it with multiple podcasts throughout the offseason. We'll be coming at you again with plenty of stuff. But let's get to the featured guest. Tom Waddle joins me next. This is Bill Zimmerman, Bears Banter. We'll be right back. Welcome back into the podcast. Excited to have this gentleman on. He was on a few years ago, and we've gotten him back on the podcast. He is, of course, half of the great Waddle and Sylvie, longtime Chicago Bear, legendary Chicago Bear in my eyes. He is Tom Waddle, and he joins me now. Tom, Bill Zimmerman, how are you?
Bill, I'm doing well. That was a little more flattering than I deserved, but thanks for having me for sure. It's great to be with you.
Well, I appreciate that. Appreciate everything, you and Sylvie do, sometimes pumping up my podcast and whatnot. But, you've been doing media a long time, obviously Bears there, late 80s into the early 90s. So I want to ask you a little bit, start on more of a somber note with the passing of Virginia McCaskey. And I know you were at the service, and, look, I'm not looking for details, but I do think it was really nice to see Roger Goodell, several owners, a lot of past Bears, a lot of people really came out to pay tribute to her. And I thought that was really nice.
Yeah, Bill, it was great. It was a tribute to a great lady who lived a remarkable life. Obviously, we could all be so lucky to make it to 102. And I saw her at training camp this year, but really I didn't get a chance to interact with her. But I want to say as recently as a year and a half ago, I saw her, and like she was, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but she could have, talked circles around me even at that time. She was sharp. She was witty, as she always was. I just thought she was such a wonderful person. If you were part of the Bears organization, whether you were a player, you worked in the front office, you were part of the medical staff, whatever it was, you were family. And I know you've heard it a ton since she passed late last week. Family, faith, and football was, those three things were hugely important to her. And the family part of it, we could feel as players for sure. Like you'd step on the plane to go wherever we were going on. If we were playing away from Soldier Field, and she would be right there in the first row, and she knew everybody's name and said hello to everyone, asked about your wife or if you had kids, just very in touch, very, and it was meaningful. It wasn't just surface stuff. It was heartfelt. And she had done so much in the community and had so much pride and passion for the team that she was, at that point, obviously the owner of. It was just so sincere. And the thing I'll remember most about her is just how kind and caring she was to every member of the Chicago Bears family. And, I know it's been mentioned quite a bit. It may sound a bit trivial as somebody, passes away, but there is some comfort, I think, inside the family. And they even, there was a joke about it at the funeral this week. That her the last game she saw was a win over the Packers at Lambeau. So if you're going to go out after a marvelous 102-year stretch, knowing her passion for the team and for the game and respect for the rivalry, what better way to do it than to beat the Green Bay Packers? But you're right. It was great to see. You got the chance to spend a little bit of time with the family at the wake the night before, and then at the funeral. Yeah, I wasn't shocked in the slightest that there were. Lovie Smith was there. Greg Blosh was there. So many of the players from Lovie's era, a lot of the players from the 85 squad, Dan Hampton, Otis Wilson, Richard Dan. I mean, there was a number of people. And then, as you mentioned, Roger Goodell was there. I think Clark Hunt was there. The Mara family was there. Mike Brown from the Bengals was there. I saw Tom Ricketts there as well. So anybody in the sports arena, in the NFL or even here locally, there was a true respect. And I think it was nice to see everybody out there celebrating her life. I think it was an event to definitely celebrate. Obviously there was some sadness, but again, what a marvelous life she led.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like you're talking about how she knew everyone's name and everything, because I think it's always kind of obviously when George Halas died and she became the primary owner, it was at first it was Ed McCaskey, then it was Michael McCaskey, now it's George McCaskey. She's never been the face of the ownership group of the family, but yet she was always there. She was always present and
always the boss, Bill. She was always the boss, and we knew it. So like when you get on that plane, if guys were horsing around, and you saw Mrs. McCaskey, the first thing you did was straighten up, and you started
great.
Your seat with your manners and your politeness, out of respect. And it was funny that you're right. She was never front facing with regard to day in and day out stuff from our perspective as players, but we all knew who was the boss. I mean, there was no question about it.
Yeah, and the one thing, and I actually looked for it on YouTube, and I couldn't find it. The memory I have of her is when the Bears won the NFC against the Saints. There, the Devin Hester, that when they played the Colts in the Super Bowl, and they're getting awarded the George Halas Trophy in the locker room, and she's in there, and she is just on cloud nine. She's running around, bopping around. You would have thought she was 40 years old, not 85 or whatever she was at that point. It was like there was so much joy, and you could tell she was just having the time of her life. And like, she wasn't like the stiff owner that just kind of stands there and holds the trophy and shakes Rodgers' hand and says, thank you very much. No, it was like this, just like, hey, we're back in the Super Bowl and this is awesome. And I think that would just kind of reflected her whole life.
Yeah. Look, they're not an oil, it's not an oil family. They're not a hedge fund group that, made their wealth in a different arena and then decided that owning a professional sports franchise was something they wanted to do. This was their life. This was, who they were. So not surprised at all. And it was all, as I said, it was all sincere, and very rarely do you see, and I don't want to stereotype all owners of NFL franchises or professional sports entities, but I just felt that it was kind of unique that you had somebody who owned an NFL franchise who pretty much knew every guy on the team and everyone in the building by their first name, and probably could recite, your wife's name and your children's name as well. There was just a personal touch to it that I think everybody always appreciated.
That's fantastic. So let me ask you here, kind of business side moving forward. There's a lot of internet articles and things that I don't think are very sourced about what's going to happen with ownership moving forward. And they might have to sell because of the estate tax and they can't afford it and all this. But I know there are always succession plans on file with the league. This is obviously something they thought about. I know when Lamar Hunt died, he used a series of trusts to get the team over to Clark without like obscene taxes on that. Like, do you see any bumps in the road in the transition here, or do you think this is going to transition to however it's going to look moving forward pretty smoothly?
Yeah, it was pure speculation on my part, Bill, because I have no inside knowledge, but my guess would be, for the reasons you mentioned, that it'll be business as usual, at least for the very near future. I'm sure this was not a surprise, obviously. As we mentioned, she was 102 years old. So my guess is the family had a lot of this mapped out in the way that it had to. It's certainly not my area of expertise as well, but I think the NFL several years ago kind of changed some of their rules with regard to how to pass the ownership of the team down. So it's not as much of a tax burden, and it made it a little bit easier to keep these teams within the family's control if that's what they chose to do. So I think that they've probably accessed that avenue as well. Yeah, I don't think that anything will change dramatically. That would be my guess over the course of the next year or so. I do think, with the stadium issue on the front burner and the change in how you can access, capital from hedge funds or private equity, I wouldn't be shocked if that's an avenue that they investigate seriously. I mean, if you go back and look at the Eagles, I don't know the specific numbers, but I think that Jeffrey Lurie sold about 8% of that team for about $700 million, I guess, approximately. So there's an opportunity there to access, some of the value of your franchise, if in fact it's something that they need to do to put this stadium plan in place. So that would be the one thing that I think, Bill, I'd keep an eye on more so than actually them, selling the team.
Yeah, no, I do think that makes a lot of sense. I've wondered the same thing myself. So obviously, I want to ask you, plenty about the Bears here moving forward in the now Ben Johnson era. But we just had a game played in New Orleans, so I do want to ask a former football player and analyst about the game, because that was, I think, remarkable. I don't think a lot of people saw that coming, whether you thought the Eagles were going to win or not. I don't think anyone thought that kind of domination. And, you know, we always hear, you got to get the coach right. You got to get the quarterback right, which obviously the Chiefs have done. And it is, you know, several Super Bowls to have for it. But what do you think of how that game played out and what Howie Roseman has done in building up this Eagles team?
Yeah, it's funny because we spent all week, you know, talking about how if you used analytics and you used the eye test and you used all of the different things you try to use to project and predict what's going to happen on the football field, it all pointed to the Eagles. You know, I even made the case the week before that you know, I think this was the best team that the Chiefs had faced in any of their 5 Super Bowls, and it could be arguably the worst Chiefs team. And again, it's all relative, that had taken the field in a Super Bowl. So the matchup, I thought, you know, on paper really favored the Philadelphia Eagles, but I'm a dumbass. So I actually predicted that because Andy Reid and Patrick
Mahomes, right,
are Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and the biggest stage under the brightest lights, I do kind of put in a little extra value on Andy's experience and talent as a play caller and a game planner. And certainly with Patrick Mahomes, what he's been able to do, I kind of gave them an overvalue. So I you know, it wasn't a game that I felt strongly either way, but I did suggest that the Chiefs were going to win, but that was a mauling at the line of scrimmage. You know, it was beautifully. Yeah, I think maybe the best way to say it was, you know, kind of beautifully basic. What Vic Fangio did, he looked at what the Chiefs were bringing to the party, and he looked at what he had, and he decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 4 guys and I'm going to challenge them to get the best of the guys from across from them, 5 guys or however many guys you had in protection. And we're going to play zone coverage behind it, and we're going to force them to go the length of the field. And I have tremendous confidence in my guys that they're going to get home and get, you know, Patrick Mahomes out of his play. So it wasn't anything exotic. It was a brilliant game plan. Don't get me wrong. I think Vic's as good a game planner defensively as anybody in the National Football League. But it was kind of basic, you know. I mean, his guys were better at the line of scrimmage and the point of attack than what the Chiefs had to offer. So, but to the degree that the Chiefs got mauled at the line of scrimmage was a bit surprising to me. And the way that Patrick Mahomes played in the face of that kind of pressure was a little surprising to me as well. But tribute to, I thought there was 2 things, I guess the best way to describe it, that kind of sat with me that I felt about that game when it was done, was the dominance of the front 4 of the Philadelphia Eagles. I really think they set the tone for the entire game. And, you know, it was also, I thought that Spags was going to try, obviously, there's no rocket science here. I thought he was going to try and slow down Saquon and force Jalen Hurts to beat him through the air. And if he can do that, so be it. And that's what happened. I think they held Saquon Barkley at 57 rushing yards. I think they got him more involved in the passing game as the game went on because they weren't having any success running it with him. They dared Jalen Hurts to beat them through the air. And Jalen Hurts, like he did a couple of years ago in the Super Bowl, played brilliantly, like he did all postseason. That young man's got a knack for you know, or has the clutch gene, or has the knack to play his best football in the most important time. So the dominance at the line of scrimmage from the defense and the performance of Jalen Hurts, obviously through the interception, but outside of that, I think total 5 incompletions, played a very efficient game, dropped the ball where it needed to be, you know, in crucial times. So Jalen's play and the defense, to me, that was the 2 biggest stories of the game.
Yeah, it really was. And you brought up Vic Fangio, and I was kind of thinking about this as I was watching this game. And when I say defensive coordinator, I don't mean defensive mind. Like Tom Landry, longtime head coach, you know, shorter time as a defensive coordinator. Same with Bill Belichick, obviously with the Giants in the 80s and early 90s. But like Vic Fangio's resume as a defensive coordinator, and I know he didn't get a lot of shots as a head coach, and then when he finally did in Denver, it didn't work out. But I mean, Carolina Panthers in the mid 90s as an expansion team, and he had immediately a great defense. And what he did in San Francisco and Philadelphia, Chicago, all these different locations where he continues to build elite defenses. Like when you look at the body of work as him as a defensive coordinator, like it may be arguably the best resume a defensive coordinator's ever had. Again, not people who have been defensive-minded head coaches, just defensive coordinator. It's a remarkable run he's had.
You're too young to remember this probably, but the start for me of knowing who Vic was back in my playing days. Vic was the linebackers coach with the Saints. And if you remember back at that time, that foursome.
The Pat Swilling, Ricky Jackson.
Yes, and Sam Mills, the late Sam Mills. You had Pat Swilling, Ricky Jackson, Vaughn Johnson, Sam Mills. That crew was the best foursome of linebackers. They obviously played a 3-4, but Vic was their linebackers coach at that particular time. Like, we played against those guys on a couple of occasions. That was a nightmare. So, like, it just shows you like his versatility on how to use guys, whether it's a 3-4 or 4-3, whatever it takes, whether he needs to blitz you, to heat up your quarterback, or just, again, the brilliance of his game plan on Sunday, was just keep it simple, stupid. I got better guys up front than you've got to protect your quarterback, and we're gonna rush the quarterback with 4. We're gonna rotate guys in because we're talented and we're deep, and we're gonna play zone coverage behind it, and we're gonna kick your ass. And that's what they did. Vic is something else. People forget, when Jim Harbaugh had that 4-year stretch out in San Francisco.
Yep.
Vic was. I mean, Jim was my quarterback, so I'm partial and biased towards him. But like, Jim could put a staff together. That his offensive coordinator was Greg Roman, So, but yeah, Vic was something else. When Vic was the defensive coordinator here in the first year, they were the number 1 scoring defense in the league. Then they were top 5 the following year, and then I think they had some injuries with Khalil Mack, and then it wasn't as dominant. And then Vic left, but like, I got nothing but love for what Vic Fangio has done as an NFL defensive coach.
Yeah, he's really, truly remarkable. So obviously gotta talk some Bears with you here. So let me ask you this here as we kind of enter the Chicago Bears offseason here with Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles. When I had Rick Smith on my podcast and I asked him about GM alignment and what that meant, the one thing Rick was talking about is how like GMs fall in love with their draft picks and their players, and that GM alignment basically is that like that you can put that aside and look at the new vision and the head coach's vision, which I thought was interesting. And no one really knew what the GM alignment thing meant, and Rick kind of explained that. But to me, it really kind of showed that this is not going to be Ryan Poles handles the personnel and Ben Johnson is scheming up and the head coach. It really seems like Ben's got a plan with personnel and is going to be heavily involved in that as well. And I'm not saying Ben Johnson's running football operations, but while on paper it may be that Ben Johnson is reporting to Ryan Poles, this really feels like it's going to be truly a team effort here and kind of tweaking this roster and building it moving forward.
Totally agree. And it's something that I think is most appealing. I think, I think collaboration was a term that they used up there with a previous regime. So, I don't want to give anybody, some sort of flashback, but I think it will be a collaboration. I like Ryan Poles. He's a BC guy. I think he's done some nice things. The body of work isn't what he had hoped and isn't what we all had hoped. And I really, I told people that I think if you are going to move forward with Ryan in charge of your personnel, which I think he'll do a better job as time goes on. I've seen a lot of people in this sport get better the longer they stay in it, or get better when, as time goes by.
Like Howie Roseman.
Yes, Howie. It's such a great point, Bill, not to completely deviate from the conversation, but people forget, he drafted Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. There have been some mistakes, but Howie got it back on track especially after, the Chip Kelly experience, and Howie's done as good a job as any modern day GM as I've ever seen. But I think that, one of my strong thoughts was coming out of the 2024 season was, okay, Bears decide we're going to keep some continuity here, at least in the front office with Ryan Poles and with Ian Cunningham, if Ian doesn't move on to get a general manager's job in Jacksonville, was that you're going to have to, as you said, you're kind of, you fall in love with your guys because they're your guys. And I thought that the first thing that Ryan would have to do as he continues in this role of general manager is look at his roster with a a glass half empty approach as opposed to a glass half full. Tell me why I should keep my own guys. And I was telling people at the time too, Ben Johnson was the guy I wanted because they've invested so much on the offensive side of the ball over the course of the last few years. You had Caleb Williams, you drafted Rome at 9, you gave DJ Moore contract extension, you paid Cole Kmet a couple of years prior, you sent a 4th-round pick to the Chargers for Keenan Allen, you signed DeAndre Swift, you signed, Gerald Everett, you pushed all your chips into the offensive side of the ball. And now going forward as well, you're going to have to continue to do that, especially up front with their offensive line. And what did you get for it? Basically, you were bottom 5 in all statistical categories. They were dead last in yards per game. They were, next to last in third downs. They were dead last in sacks. They were dead last in so many things. They just did not get the return on the investment. So for me, the answer was Ben Johnson, and the fact that he didn't have head coaching experience didn't really bother me as much as maybe it did some others. I had a 3-year stretch of evidence that shows me that Ben is really good at what he does. Now, was the Detroit Lions roster stacked? Sure, and it got better over the course of time. But Ben Johnson also did his best work getting the most out of guys and putting them in situations to succeed. And that's what I wanted for him to come here and do. So to get back to the whole issue of personnel, I'm with you 100%. Like, I think Ryan needs to look at his roster and say, hey, I drafted this guy. Is he right for what we're trying to do? And I need Ben Johnson to sit in the room with Ryan and say, hey, look, I know you gave this guy some money, but that's not what I'm really looking to do. And they're going to have to work together. And if Ben Johnson says, and I don't think Ben Johnson needs control of the 53-man roster. I just think he needs a loud voice in the room, especially with some of the mistakes that have been made previously. Thought that Ben would, not only is he one of the most creative offensive minds, I think he knows exactly what a good offensive line looks like. He knows I think he can help out with some of the personnel decisions. So I think Ryan's got to look at his own roster with the help of Ben, with a really discerning eye, and whether or not I drafted this guy or I gave this guy money, if this isn't the answer going forward, we got to move on, and I think they've got to be willing to do that. And that's difficult, as you mentioned, because sometimes you fall in love with your guy and it's on your resume and you want to make sure that your guy succeeds. Sometimes the best move you can make is to pivot and head in a different direction and just admit that you may have gotten that one wrong.
Yeah, and I want to ask you 2 more things here before I let you go. And first one, Ken, you're talking about the offensive line, and obviously we all know that needs to be fixed here when we look at the trenches. Defensive line certainly needs more depth as well. We all love Andrew Billings, but the defensive line can't collapse because Andrew Billings is hurt. It just can't. So I know they need work on both sides, but on the offensive side, what do you want to see them do? Do you want to see them break the bank for Trey Smith? Do you want, Drew Dahlman? Like, or do you want to see more heavy investment in the draft? Both? Like, what would Tom Waddle's approach be to fixing the offensive line, which certainly needs a lot of help this offseason?
Well, I think you got to use the resources you have, you have an abundance of them. You have 9 draft picks, and you have, depending on who's telling you what, I mean, they've got anywhere between $60 and $80 million. I'm not, I was out. My best friends were linemen for the most part, because I was I ran like them and was unathletic like them, and they were my best of friends. But I'm not an expert with all of it, so I would defer to others. It's easy to say, hey, yeah, I'm on the Trey Smith bandwagon here, set the market, bring him in. Look, if Ben Johnson thinks that he's the best answer, go get him. I have always thought, just in general terms, that the center position is so very important, especially for a young quarterback. The last thing you want your young quarterback to have to step to the line of scrimmage and worry about is the snap or having to set all the protections. Like, you'll get to a point. Olin Kreutz tells a great story about how he always set protections in Chicago, got to the Saints and tried to do it in his first practice, and Drew Brees tapped him and goes, "Oh, and I got this." So, when you're young, you need that help from one of those veteran offensive linemen, one of those centers. And I've always, that to me has always, kind of stayed with me. And once Caleb becomes a more experienced quarterback and has a better feel for what's going on around him, then he can take over more of the control of setting protections and doing all that stuff. But I just think somebody, and again, I think that pressure that comes from the middle always affects quarterbacks more than the pressure that comes from the edge. And look, I don't think quarterbacks like to get hit from, edge rushers any more than they like to get hit from defensive tackles or three techniques. But I think the vision issue and seeing it in front of you, I think it does affect them. Especially, I don't think Caleb's height is a problem, but he's not 6'5". So everything that's coming from the middle of the line of scrimmage, I think, is maybe a little bit more impactful than the edge. So I do think that the center position is very important for them. Look, again, I'm no offensive line specialist, but I think Braxton Jones is more equipped to be a good swing tackle than he is to be your foundation piece on the left side. So you got cash. I mean, if it's Trey Smith, great. If it's, Dahlman from, I believe from the Falcons, fantastic. Find somebody, solidify. You got draft currency. My brain is open to anything, Bill. I'm also part of the crew that, look, if the Dallas Cowboys call you and they want to move Micah Parsons, he'll be 26 when he plays this season, NFL season. Let me know what it's going to take, and I'll make a decision whether or not I'm willing to pay that steep price. But he would also address, an issue on the other side of the football in the trenches. And as I said, you got 9 draft picks. You've got plenty of capital. I think you have to start that. They worked from the outside in with the previous crew. I think you got to look, and I'm sure Ben Johnson, is focused on this as well. From this point forward, you got to start building from the inside out. And whoever it is, I think they need to use their currency, solidifying what they're doing at the line of scrimmage. Because again, to circle back to what we started with, the Philadelphia Eagles beat the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 59 because they were better at the line of scrimmage. So at the end of the day, you can have the most elite passing schemes in the world, but much of the heavy lifting and the hard work is done at the line of scrimmage. And if you're not good there, you're not going to get to the top of the mountain, regardless of how good your quarterback is. Look at what the Commanders did this year. I mean, we talk about what Jaden Daniels did, and he was fantastic and poised and did great things. But they solidified their offensive line and gave that young man, a bit of a head start, which I thought was important.
Yeah, really was. All right. So last thing for you. So if you're saying you're not an offensive line expert, well, I'm going to lean into your expertise then and ask you about this wide receiver room, because I think a lot of things are headed in the right direction. I think we all love DJ Moore, although I do think, there were some questions on some of the things he did on the field this past year. Keenan Allen, I don't know what you think, kind of a quarterback's best friend. You were a quarterback's best friend, though, you guys play differently, but still similar roles, being able to make those tough catches on critical third downs. And I'm curious what you think of Rome's first season and where he's headed. So kind of quick assessment on
yeah, I would say with DJ, DJ's been my favorite player in town, since he got here. I'm not going to lie. There were some things that you saw this past year that didn't sit well. DJ's always on the practice field. DJ works his ass off. DJ, is ultra talented. There's so many good qualities. I was shocked, Bill, to see how the frustration manifested itself on the field this past year. I get it. It wasn't going his way, but I was a little bit surprised at how he reacted at different times. Keenan Allen, one of my favorite receivers over the course of the last 5 to 7 years. I thought last year they focused too much on him. I thought Caleb got, dialed in too much to trying to get the ball to him. I thought they forgot about the tight end. I don't think Cole is, the second coming of George Kittle or Trey McBride or, any number of downfield big threats at the tight end position. But he is somebody that can, he can do some good things for your team. And I thought they just kind of lost track of the tight end position. I don't think he and Caleb were on the same page at all, which meant that I thought that was the residual of throwing to Keenan as much as they did. I would wish Keenan well. Again, fabulous career, borderline Hall of Fame player. I just don't think that's the route they need to go. Rome was my favorite guy coming out of the draft. I know Malik Neighbors was a better guy, better receiver, more explosive with the ball in his hands, but I thought Rome was a better route runner. I thought Rome's size, his speed, his route running of all the entire route tree. He's a hand catcher. He was just my favorite. He and the kid that the Jacksonville Jags drafted.
Brian Thomas.
Yeah, both of those guys were guys that really stood out to me Great class. I'm not talking down the other guys, but I'm a big Rome fan. Think he's a hard work, classy kid, really talented player. I'm really excited to see how Ben Johnson uses him. I think the step he takes in his second year with this team, I think could be really dramatic. They need a speed guy. Look at what Jameson Williams provided the Detroit Lions. You've got to have somebody that just threatens the hell out of a secondary and takes the top off the defense so that other guys can work underneath. I don't know that Tyler Scott is that guy. That's up to Ben Johnson to figure out. I like DJ. I really like Rome. I think you've got two pieces that will work really, really well. What Ben decides to do at the tight end position and with the third wide receiver position will be very, very interesting. And whether or not he decides to go forward with DeAndre Swift, the guy he moved off of a few years ago, it's going to be very, very intriguing. But I think you got a couple of pieces out on the edge with DJ and Rome that you can definitely build with for sure.
All right, well, there he is, Tom Waddle. Again, half of Waddle and Sylvia on ESPN 1000. You guys all know him well, former Bear. Tom, that was a great interview. Thanks for so much time. Really appreciate it. And hopefully the 2025 Bears season is one to remember. Well, I guess the 2024 season was one to remember as well, but for different reasons.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Bill. I appreciate it.
All right, there he is, Tom Waddle, everybody. That was a fun interview. That was really good. Tom's the best. I mean, he might be the top dog in all of Chicago media, like sports media, like any sport, all sports, radio hosts, writers. He might be the guy. He is phenomenal at what he does. That was a lot of fun. And again, Waddle and Sylvie, great show on Chicago Sports Radio. And if you don't listen, you really should. So let's jump into the mailbag. We got a few to get to here. Not as loaded as it usually is, but let's dive in here. Let's see what we got. All right. TJ Gobig asks, what are your favorite and least favorite coaching staff hires? I actually think that one's pretty easy, TJ. My favorite is Dennis Allen. I think Dennis Allen is smart on multiple levels. Number one, he had, again, a bad head coach, but he has been a head coach before. He has experience in terms of how things should operate. He can help Ben Johnson in that regard. He's got experience there. Like the one thing when Matt Eberflus came in, right? Like that was a little like, again, I didn't love the hire and you can go back and be like, I was like, we'll see. That was basically it. But Matt Eberflus was the first-time head coach. Alan Williams was the first-time defensive coordinator. Luke Getsy was the first-time offensive coordinator. There's no experience to lean on there. Those guys had no idea what they were doing. So they just kind of all went off of what they had seen previously, but they did not have any actually experienced coaches to truly lean on. And I think that was a mistake, and I think that was a major problem. So Dennis Allen being here, I think makes a lot of sense, and I really like that hire. Obviously, I also think he is an excellent defensive coordinator. I think he's probably one of the top 5 defensive coordinators in the league right now. And I think that's going to be a really, really strong hire. Like, I think Matt Eberflus was a good defensive coordinator. I think Dennis Allen is a better defensive coordinator. So I think we're going to see some positives in there. I like Declan Doyle in terms of what he could be. A lot of people think he's like the whiz kid. Sean Payton didn't want to lose him. Ben Johnson sees something in him. So maybe he's going to be great. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm going to fawn over Declan Doyle. So Dennis Allen is my favorite hire. My least favorite hire is Press Taylor. I think he's terrible at what he does. I think he is a bad coach. I honestly, when I saw that news, I was surprised that Ben Johnson wanted to bring him in. I just don't think he's very good. It goes beyond his play calling in Jacksonville and the stuff in Jacksonville. People I've talked to is like, he's not good at his job. This is a guy that seems to like fail up. I don't quite understand what's happened there. Maybe Ben Johnson sees something in him that he is particularly good at as the passing game coordinator, and he's going to have him focus in that one area. I hope that's the case, but I do not have a lot of confidence that Press Taylor is going to be the guy there. Now, remember, and we'll see, maybe Press Taylor is one of the guys Ben Johnson wanted, but remember, Rick Smith said it takes a couple years for a coach like Ben Johnson to bring in all the guys he wants because of contracts and things like that. So maybe Press Taylor is a one and done here. We will see. All right. Kurt asks, if you had to bet on someone not named Trey Smith, the Bears will be after in free agency, who would be your guess? I'll say Will Fries. I'd like to see them go after a guard. The only center out there, I think, is Drew Dahlman. Ryan Smith's Ryan Kelly, I should say, is a little too old. Like, I don't love the free agent centers. I really don't. And I don't love the center draft class. I'm going to get more into it. Maybe I'll get, a couple players will change my mind on them when I watch a little more tape and dive into things a little more. I really wish Ryan Poles would have addressed center better last year. When he had money, he had draft picks. I mean, between Barton, between Frazier, JPJ, there were guys there, but Poles sat up, didn't trade up, that's fine. But, didn't pick any of those guys. There were even second-tier guys that are looking pretty good that Poles could have drafted, instead drafted Karan Amagaji. He needed to draft interior at 75. He didn't. That was a mistake. Again, that's why I have concerns about Ryan Poles. But, and there were some good free agents, Lloyd Cushenberry. There were some good free agent centers as well. Poles passed on all of them. He went cheap with Ryan Bates and Coleman Shelton, and it didn't really work out. Shelton was pretty good in the back half. Guys that really know scheme and how Ben Johnson's going to want to run things. Again, I am not the amazing X's and O's guy. So I talk to people who are, and they say Coleman Shelton's not going to be able to run Ben Johnson's scheme. So he can't come back. So they're going to have to go a different direction. Do they go out and pay for Drew Dahlman? I don't know. Maybe they do. Doesn't seem like the Falcons are going to be able to keep him. But at the same time, he's going to get overpaid because he's really, to me, the only center worthwhile in the free agent market. And I think, again, I could be wrong, but I think he's going to be getting upward of 14, 15 million a year. I don't know. When he went, he's missed a lot of time. I think he's missed, 12 games or so the last 2 years. And talking to some people in Atlanta about him, they all like him. They think he's a very good player, but they also said when he was out, the Falcons, it's not like the Falcons offensive line collapsed. They were able to support without him, with Matthew Bergeron, who is a rookie, sitting next to him at guard. Now the other guard is now I'm drawing a blank. Chris Lindstrom, who's great. So obviously that's going to help. But at the same time, I don't know if I want to spend a ton of money on Drew Dahlman. If they do, I'm glad they brought in a center and help stabilize the line, but we will see what they do. So I'll say Will Fries on that one. But yeah, I think they need to bring in two. Again, guard center, two guards. I'm okay with how they want to approach this, but I think they need to bring in two interior offensive linemen, legitimately spend, in terms of that over 10 million, that 12, 15, $20 million a year. They need to bring in two offensive linemen at that price. Carl Grace, have you heard of any draftees in particular that Poles his eye in heavy? I have not. Poked around a little bit at the Super Bowl. Didn't hear much about things going on with the Chicago Bears at this point. Still a little early. Obviously, the combine is where they're going to really start meeting with guys and really start zeroing in on guys. Having the number one pick, Caleb Williams, that was much different. You were going to get information on that way in advance. But sitting there at number 10, a lot's going to depend on how things shake out in front of them and kind of the positions of need. So I'm not sure exactly. You heard the Eddie George thing that, they like the Ohio State running backs. But at the same time, that was done before Ben Johnson was hired. So, and like I said, I think Ben Johnson's going to have a huge influence on personnel and who they're drafting, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So I think it's a little too early for that. I think over the next 3 weeks is when we'll really start maybe hearing some things about where the Bears might want to go in the draft. Sheldon S. with needs on the OL and the DL. Should the Bears trade down in the draft to collect more picks and thus depth? They do have a good amount of picks. We'll see if Ian Cunningham gets the job. They'll get another third-round pick if that happens. This draft, as I'm getting into it, I don't know if they want to trade down. Again, it depends on who they like. Do you want to draft Will Campbell at 10? He's probably my favorite guy. That I think is going to be there. I mean, a guy like Mason Graham would be all, if he's there, take him. I just don't even hesitate. Just run the card in. But at the same time, I don't think he's going to be there. So there's not a lot of top heavy offensive linemen. There's not like these stud tackles. Will Campbell probably projects inside. He's got shorter arms, which probably means Ryan Poles doesn't see him as a tackle, but we'll see. We'll see what they do there. I don't think they need to trade down in round 1. I think if you got a top 10 pick, take the top 10 pick. In round 2, you got 2 of those high-end picks. And that's an area where a lot of teams look at because they like a guy, they have a first round grade on a guy and he fell out of the first round. They want to come up and get him because they think he's worth it. So with the Bears having 2 high-end second-round picks, they could keep one of them and, take a player and then take the other one and trade down. You could probably get another third-round pick if you trade down from the early second round into the late second round, and then you get that team's late third-round pick as well. So that may be something they do, especially if Ian Cunningham does not get the job. But keep in mind, if Ian Cunningham gets this Jaguars job, a lot of people think he is very high up on the Jaguars wish list. If he lands this job, the Bears are already going to have 2 seconds and 2 thirds. So yes, I love the idea of depth, but at the same time, I do think they're in a pretty good position here without trading down. Joe Tucio, will Ben Johnson have more influence on the personnel than Eberflus and make Ryan Poles be more aggressive? Poles has to know this is potentially his last chance if it doesn't work out. Well, Joe, I said it at the beginning there, and then Tom Waddle kind of reiterated. Ben Johnson's going to have a lot of influence here. Again, none of us trying to give scoops, but both of us really believe Ben Johnson's going to have a lot of influence. And I think going back to that Rick Smith interview, and I know I said it before on this podcast, GM alignment means the GM is not in love with the players he's taken previously, which means Ben Johnson's going to want to go in and be like, hey, I know you love this player. I think he sucks. Get him out of here. I think we're going to see some of that. It's probably, we're not going to come across that way publicly, but there's going to be some difficult conversations behind closed doors. So we'll see what happens here. I don't know if he's going to be more aggressive because of it. I don't know if aggressive means, spending more money in free agency because Poles has had a hard line there, or if you want him to trade up. I'm not sure how that's going to result, but I do think we are going to see a bit of a change in terms of how they address personnel moving forward. All right. I'm Little John. Tratham aside, my hot take is that the IOL free agents out there represent marginal upgrades at best over Jenkins, Shelton, and Pryor. Thoughts? I wouldn't say marginal. If Jenkins played 17 games a year, he should stay. So when you say marginal upgrade over Tevin Jenkins, yes, because Tevin Jenkins is very good, but Tevin Jenkins isn't on the field enough. That's the problem. I wouldn't be opposed if Tevin Jenkins wants to take an affordable team-friendly deal, like in the Nate Davis range, 3 years, $30 million, $20 million guaranteed. I'd do that for Tevin, as long as the Bears make sure they have like a second-round pick behind him, someone that they can really trust to step in and play well when Tevin inevitably gets hurt. I'm not opposed to bringing Tevin Jenkins back. I'm opposed to bringing Tevin Jenkins back at, 16, 17 million a year, because I just don't think he's reliable enough for that. So marginal upgrades over Tevin Jenkins, I think, is a little different. Now, Drew Dahlman, I've said, I don't want to overpay for him. He's much better than Coleman Shelton. And Matt Pryor is a serviceable player. You want Matt Pryor to be a backup. You don't want Matt Pryor to be a starter. So I totally disagree there. Like Will Fries compared to Matt Pryor, that's not even a competition. Trey Smith, you said Trey Smith aside, but that is, there are some other players there. But, if you look at free agent lists, you're going to see Tevin Jenkins pretty high up because he's a talented player. So when you say marginal improvement, yes, but at the same time, the reason Tevin Jenkins isn't here, if he does, in fact, leave in free agency, is not because of his skills. It's because of how much he is available. All right. Austin says, instead of going after Garrett or Parsons in a weak draft, could the Bears trade up from 10 to 4 or 5 with one of the seconds to get Abdul Carter, leaves future draft picks intact, and leaves cap room for OL while getting potentially the top pass rusher in the draft? Well, I think that's going to depend on what happens at the quarterback situation there, Austin. Let me bring up the old trade chart here while I'm talking here, because I think when you're looking at trading up, you sit there and go, well, first of all, is Abdul Carter going to be there at 4 or 5? For him to be there at 4 or 5, you need both quarterbacks to go basically like 1-2. Right now, we're not seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of people say that these are the quarterbacks that are going to get GMs fired. So I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case. And if you don't have consensus number 1, number 2 quarterbacks going, that's always dangerous as well. That's a whole different thing. When Daniel Jones is the top quarterback, when Kenny Pickett is the top quarterback, we see how poorly things go. Again, There wasn't a consensus number one, and Patrick Mahomes went in that in 2017. So I'm not saying it always works out that way, but it certainly could. All right, so let's look at this. You want Abdul Carter. We're at 10. That's 1,300 points. To get to, let's look at who might trade down, like who is not there. The Jets would at 7 maybe because they're not a player away. The Raiders could at 6. They're not a player away, but that's not going to get you Abdul Carter. I don't think Jacksonville would get you Abdul Carter. So let's New England. I don't think the Giants would trade down. They need elite talent. Maybe Cleveland would. So you're talking, let's say New England. And again, I don't think New England's going to want to trade down, but let's say New England. You got to make up 500 points. The 39th pick would get you there. You might have to throw in a little sweetener there. You could go from 10 to 4. But if you need to go from 10 to 2, and I could see Cleveland trading down. I could. If they don't want one of these quarterbacks, I could see Cleveland trading down. Now, again, I could see Cleveland trading Myles Garrett and taking Abdul Carter and not going anywhere. So if you need to go up to 2, and this is where it gets a little sticky, that's 2,600 points. That's a 13. Now, suddenly, at 4, in theory, you just have to give up a second-round pick and maybe a later pick. To get up to 2, you have to come up with an additional 800 points. So to get up to 2, you'd have to, if you don't want to give up future picks, you'd have to give up 39 and 41. That's 1,000 points. That doesn't get you across the finish line. If you gave up 72, that's 230 points. You are still 70 points shy. Then you're probably looking at, if let's say Ian Cunningham takes the job, you'd have to give up both 2s and both 3s to go up from 10 to 2. That is not happening. 10 to 4, maybe. But again, Abdul Carter, I think, is just simply too good. And I do not think he would be available at 4. I think you'd have to come up to 2 to get him. And that is not something the Chicago Bears would do. I think that is all of them. So that's going to wrap up the mailbag. Thank you all for joining me. We will be back not next week, but I'm going to want to do a free agency primer there either last week of February, first week of March. Obviously need to line up a guest for that. So look for that one to come out next. And then we'll do like a free agency wrap up kind of after that and start pivoting to the draft. We'll get a couple more draft pods in, hopefully in April as well. I'm sure EJ Snyder will join me for his annual draft visit that we always do, but that's going to be a couple months from now. So that's going to do it for Bears Banter. We will talk to you again all soon. Bear down, everybody. Adios.